So the first group above the line we're going to be talking about, that's something between Yaakov and Leah, and then the next section is between Yaakov and Rachel. Two interesting exchanges. So if you look at the first source, it's pasuk from this week's parsha. This is after the whole episode of Yaakov Avinu having married both Leah, erroneously, and then Rachel afterwards. So the pasuk says, "Vayar Hashem ki senua Leah." God saw that Leah was hated, literally. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his Living Torah translation, is what I took here. So he blunts the term a bit, unloved. That's also still troublesome. But Vayiftach es Rachma, because God saw that Leah was hated, He opened up her womb. He allowed her to have children. V'Rachel akara, and Rachel remained barren. So there's a big question here. Obviously, can anybody just articulate what the issue is with this pasuk?
It implies that had Yaakov liked her, then she wouldn't have had children.
Well, that's one point.
That's the pshat.
I was thinking something more glaring. If we're going to assume that Yaakov Avinu was a tzaddik, and I think we do, right, as being one of the avos, it's very unbecoming to say that Yaakov hated anyone, much less his wife. It's a very difficult concept to
something earlier on.
Does he hate Esav?
Does Yaakov hate Esav?
Does it say there anywhere that he hates Esav?
There's nothing explicit.
Esav hates him.
Yeah, there is. I think there's a famous saying. I think it comes from. I think it's talking in a more general term, like the children of Yaakov son of Esau son of Yaakov. But nowhere I think explicitly talking about the actual individuals hitting each other. You were saying something though?
I'm trying to. I was just reading it earlier this evening. I don't remember if it's from. I think it's in RAMBAN, but I'm not sure where he quotes it from. That. The teaching is that a man would be drawn more closely and have a greater affinity to his first wife, to his first, whoever he takes first. That's what RAMBAN teaches. And so when it says that Yaakov liked Rachel, it is an unnatural act.
She was the second wife.
That's just before what you're getting into. So the RAMBAN's already talking about the fact that this whole. But I don't remember whether he's saying it or whether he's quoting it from somewhere.
There are passages in the Gemara
somewhere else.
Because really, Rachel is his first wife.
There are.
Leah is
something doesn't make sense.
What?
Leah couldn't get pregnant.
That's not the issue. Well, that's not
right then and there.
Deciding it
takes time to get pregnant. Right?
Correct. Right. We're at this point. It's just addressing the fact that God opened the womb. He gave her the ability to conceive.
I understand that, but I mean, if Yaakov hated her, then he would have divorced her right then and there. Why did he have to wait so long?
We're going to get into that. Oh, you're already looking ahead in the RAMBAN and asking this question.
No, I'm just asking. I
think your question will be a good one. Let's see what the RAMBAN says first.
So he couldn't have hated her. You know what I mean? If he hated her, at the wedding night, he should have said goodbye.
It's interesting.
And to wait for someone, to wait for his wife to get pregnant.
Yeah. Even taking it as a given, right? He actually felt a sense of hatred, which would be difficult to swallow here. So why didn't he act upon it?
Yeah.
Right. So that might give us some reason to believe to start reading more into this. That maybe Senua doesn't mean hated literally.
That's what I would say.
Right.
Couldn't we just accept that the better translation or the better understanding is Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's and saying that Leah was unloved rather than hated?
Even that I'd find difficult. To say that Yaakov didn't show any love for his wife, but we'll see what the RAMBAN himself says.
That wasn't the lady that he chose. He chose Rachel.
Beautiful.
And,
all important concepts that you're bringing up, and that the RAMBAN is going to as well. So let's see what he says. So he says, "Ki senua Leah." RAMBAN says Leah. God saw that Leah was hated. Hine Leah ramsa ba'achosa gam b'Yaakov. And then RAMBAN here is going to give two different explanations that are on opposite poles of the spectrum. He says that Leah was somebody that tricked both her sister and Yaakov. Maybe you want to say that Leah played along in this whole scheme just out of honor to her father, not to embarrass her father and expose his whole plot. That Lavan grabbed her, threw under the chuppah, and she just didn't say a word to show obedience to her father. Nevertheless, Leah should have done something, either to tell Yaakov under her breath or to hint in some way that she was, in fact, Leah, not Rachel. And also, considering the fact that Leah herself she disguised herself all night long, right? Yaakov didn't realize who she was until the next morning. Right? Like we said, that Yaakov didn't realize who it was until the morning. That's why Yaakov hated her. It's interesting, just straight up an explanation of, we wouldn't normally say that our avos hated people, but he says, the Ramban takes it straight up, says in this situation, when somebody tricks you into marrying them, it might be a little bit more warranted. And that's
a terrible explanation, with all due respect to Ramban.
So he's going to give another one that might make us a little happier.
Because Leah didn't do it.
What do you mean?
First of all, her father did it.
But that she played along.
Second of all, her sister did it. Third of all, the entire city did it.
The entire city did?
Yeah, the entire city was in on it and praised what was going on.
They knew what was going on?
Yeah.
Really? I'm not so sure.
Right. He learns that from it says v'nitna, from the word v'nitna, that we would all give. If you work the extra bit, we will all give, and understand it in the plural of nitna.
And Yaakov expected this could happen, and exchanged signals with Rachel.
So you would think he made it foolproof, and still she knew the signal.
And Rachel decided she didn't want her sister to be embarrassed by the situation, and betrayed Yaakov.
It is important to make the distinction that everything we're saying right now is from the Midrash, right? In Sukkim, this idea is not alluded to explicitly.
Well,
it's an important idea.
Yeah, but his explanation is also,
Well, maybe if we finish this part, I'll give you keeping those ideas in mind that you're saying, a really beautiful approach to this whole thing.
The implication is that Leah is the one who is doing all the conspiring, and it's absolutely not true. She's as much a victim of the conspiracy.
But that she was, Ramban I think is at least saying she was complicit, right? That's what the Ramban takes.
Everybody but Yaakov is complicit.
Everybody does it.
It's Laban's plan. It's not her
Based on the pshat, Rachel plays no role in this.
What?
Based on the pshat, there's no Rachel involved in the story. Based on the pshat, this is Laban and Leah.
But
didn't she give signs?
There's nothing.
Nothing in the Sukkim. There's nothing indicated by this.
The pshat is straightforward.
Right.
Laban takes the word, and she stays there the whole night with him, and in the morning it's too late.
So anyways, let's read a little further. I think you'll be happier with the second approach. But let's finish up this first one. That so the Ramban justifies this a little bit. He says God had mercy on Leah, even though apparently the Ramban says she did something that was a little deceitful. The Ramban says Hashem saw, nevertheless, that that Leah had a good desire. She was coming with a good kavanah to be involved with Yitzchak, the tzaddik. So and therefore he had mercy on her. That Leah's motivation, Yaakov. Leah's motivation was to be involved in making Klal Yisrael. That was her. That was where she was coming from. And we know the Midrashim also that Leah was facing as an alternative Esav, which wasn't looking so good. So the Kach Amar Bereshis Rabba, and the Ramban says that in Bereshis Rabba this is said by Chazal. Kivan Shura Yaakov Maasim Shirimsa Leah Va'achosa Nasan Deyaso Legarsha. So the Ramban is saying this isn't me saying this. Extreme idea. This is Chazal themselves in Bereshis Rabba. They said that Yaakov saw the actions that Leah did, that she tricked him, and he had in mind to divorce her, like what we mentioned earlier. The Kevin Shepakta HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'banim, but then God gave her children. Amar Iman Shal Elu Ani Megarish. Yaakov said, and this is something that, for better or for worse, happens very often nowadays. Also, he says that the mother of these children, I'm going to divorce them. Very often, the kids keep the marriage together. So that's what happened here. The Ramban says that God had mercy on Leah, not only from the sense of giving her a consolation of if your husband doesn't love you, at least have children, but actually that the children were what caused Leah to be able to remain married to Yaakov Avinu. V'zetam vayar Elokim, and that's why the Psukim here say that God saw what Leah's pain was. He had mercy on her, and he didn't abandon her. So that's one approach. That
Midrash makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, it's totally conflicting.
I think maybe because of the questions we mentioned earlier, right?
It makes no sense. Temporally, it's completely off. If Kadosh Baruch Hu says this before she has children, then why is it that he can't divorce her because she has all the children?
It's difficult, right?
Well, it makes no sense whatsoever.
If these emotions came from the trickery, you would think he'd want to divorce her right away.
Trickery, then exactly the same trickery
before any children were had.
Yes. This is after multiple children.
So that's a good question on the Midrash.
Midrash makes no sense, so we don't understand it, obviously.
the next answer I think is very good marriage advice that he says, and it's a different approach entirely. V'yesh omrim, and we have in parentheses haradak. The Radak is the one that says this more in full, that we could elaborate on after we see what the Ramban says. Ki shtayim nashim ha'achas ahuva ma'od tikra hashniya senua kenegda. If a person has 2 wives, one of them is called loved, or greatly loved, the other one by default is called hated. K'moshe amar vayehayiv gam esachel mileah. The pasuk itself says that Yaakov loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. Lo sesina. Not that he actually hated her, but nevertheless Leah was pained and embarrassed by this. And then God saw her pain through that. And the Radak expands on this a little bit more. The Radak says that you should know, basically, if a wife or a spouse, talking to everyone here, that if a spouse doesn't feel like they're the number one priority to their loved one, by default they feel hated. It's either you're on top or there's something the person feels much more conflicted, feels much more insulted by not being the top priority. That's what the Radak says. So that snua was not Yaakov's actual emotion for Leah, but it was simply that was Leah's perception from Yaakov Avinu not loving her as much as Rachel. Yes, might be good advice as to why we shouldn't have more than one spouse. You're saying you're going to say something?
No, I was going to ask a question. When it says that she's hated, whose voice is that we're hearing? Is that Leah's voice, Rachel's voice, Yaakov's voice, or God's voice?
So the second approach would seem to indicate Leah's voice.
That's right.
So that Leah felt her perception was that she was hated. Right. So that's what would be being.
We have no hint from the Torah as to whose voice it is.
I don't think the Pesukim. I think the Pesukim themselves this pasuk can lend itself to either way of looking at it.
Midrash seems to imply that the names of her children are an indication that she wasn't loved.
Or that at least if she's the one that was doing all the naming, it seems that she was communicating that she felt that way at least.
Communicating to Yaakov.
Right. So that's an interesting approach. And I thought that was one take the Ramban has, and the Ramban wrote a lot about relationships. He wrote a whole sefer about marriage, and he has some insights here that I think are very relevant to us. And then now that's with regards to Yaakov Avinu's relationship with Leah. Have some time to give over.
Can I put something into historical context? Where is Rabbeinu Gershom relative to this in terms of living? He's before them all, isn't he? He's a couple of hundred years before Rambam. He's around 10.
I'm not 15? Sure, but I feel like he's later. I think. I'm not positive.
Later?
Why do you ask?
I just want to understand what the thinking processes look like. There are very few examples in the Torah of somebody having 2 wives that are discussed in such detail. And this, and of course, we have Hannah and Shmuel, and Hannah, very, very little. So there's clearly a reason why Torah gives us the story.
But there is some insight
and why the Rabbi gives us the story later on is obviously.
We're going to bring up that relationship later on. But when you mentioned all those midrashim, I felt like I have to give over this idea. It's really something beautiful that Tue Jun, who was a Maggid in Yerushalayim many years ago, that his take on these psukim, on this whole incident, he stems it off of a question. He asks, if you look later on in the parsha, there's this episode where, with the Dudaim, that Reuven, Leah's child, comes, takes flowers, and he brings it to his mother, and Rachel wants these flowers for whatever reason, perhaps because they increased fertility, for whatever reason, Rachel wanted them. And Leah's response to her was, first you steal my husband, now you're trying to steal my flowers? And Tue Jun asks, how on earth could Leah have such chutzpah? Keep in mind these midrashim where Rachel herself gave over the signs, and Leah knew that she wasn't really meant to marry Yaakov Avinu at all in the first place. How can she approach Rachel in such a manner and accuse her of stealing her husband? It's very difficult to understand. So when Tue Jun points out that if you look in the midrashim, what were the signs, so to speak, that Rachel gave over to Leah? So one of the midrashim say that it was not just like a catcher in baseball, doing hand signals or something like that. He says that it was how to do certain mitzvahs. It was the halachos of mitzvahs that are particularly geared towards women, of chala, halakas neros, and hilchos nida. That's what one of the midrashim says. And keeping in mind that, like we mentioned last week, how the avos kept the Torah. So Rachel was communicating to Leah that you're going to be marrying a big tzaddik. He's going to expect you to know these things. So these are the things you should learn about. And Rachel gave them over, and that those, so to speak, were the signs. Tue Jun extends this, and he says that if those were the signs, you could explain this whole incident as being over Leah's head entirely. That it could be that Lavan made Leah think that in fact she was meant to marry Yaakov, that Rachel herself played along to save her sister from embarrassment, like we mentioned, and perhaps Yaakov Avinu himself, even though we see he was clearly upset, he confronts Lavan about it, perhaps Yaakov himself played along as well. Never at any point mentioned after seeing who it really was the next morning, saying, that you're not the one I was supposed to marry. He may have just, out of concern for Leah's feelings as well, not said a word. And with that, we can understand what's going on in this exchange between Leah and Rachel about the Didaim, that what Leah is saying, when Leah says, how dare you steal my husband, and now try to steal my flowers, that's coming from the perspective of Leah, who was none the wiser. She thought she was actually meant to marry Yaakov Avinu, and that there was no trickery going on at all. Rachel gave over the signs as if she was just a Kala teacher, And with that, it just shows the midos of Rachel so much more greatly. That at that point, as you can imagine, in the middle of this confrontation, Leah saying to Rachel, how dare you steal my husband? Like if it was me in that position, I would have lashed out at that point and said, steal your husband? Do you want to know what really happened? But nevertheless, Rachel kept her mouth closed, and for that she gets a tremendous amount of scar.
It's actually, if you accept that Midrash, it's actually even more than that, because we know how the story ends. That they are united, and that Yaakov gets to be with Rachel. But at the time the signs are given over, Rachel actually doesn't know what the future is going to hold. She's given her sister away and given her husband away.
All to show the great lengths of trying to save a person from embarrassment.
It kind of shows the merit of, Rachel, her empathy. Is, and I think it's why she is who she is to us long term, is that you see that she is the symbol of empathy.
There's a well-known Midrash that she is the one that comes to God in the exile and says, how can you can't tolerate Avodah Zarah so much that you send the Jews in exile, and you're putting them in a situation of danger. I managed to even take my own sister and bring her into the home as a co-wife, and in a way that put our marriage through tremendous amounts of pain. Certainly you can handle Klal Yisrael doing a few wrongs here and there. That's Rachel Mavaka. That's the Midrash that seems to communicate that idea very well. Also, that there was a tremendous amount of sacrifice on her part.
She seems to be the symbol for the Jewish people of this empathy, of this quality.
Absolutely.
That she cries, and God listens only to her tears at the end.
Her son also had the same quality of keeping a secret. When Yosef was in front of his brothers, he was able not to divulge the truth. He learned that from his mother, from Rachel.
To a point, he broke down. Sure. At the end, he broke down. He can't take it.
That's all his emotions came over him. Okay, so that was just a short piece about Yaakov Avinu's relationship with Leah, and I could go into something about his relationship with Rachel. If you take a look at the next few psukim, I think it comes right after, actually, that whole story. At the beginning of Perek Lamed, it says, Vatera Rachel ki lo yalda liYaakov. So Rachel saw that she was not having any children for Yaakov, but Kane Rachel ba'achosa. Rachel had a tremendous amount of jealousy for her sister Leah, who was having tons of children. Vatomer al Yaakov, hava li banim. She says to her husband Yaakov, give me children. V'im ayin meisa anochi. If not, let me die. Vayikar af Yaakov berachel. Yaakov Avinu got very upset at Rachel because of this. Vayomer hasachas elokim anochi. He says, am I in place of God? Asher mona mimech privaten, that God should withhold children from you. So that's the psukim, and this exchange is also very difficult to make sense of. Right, so you could ask a number of questions. Anybody want to say one that comes to their head?
Well, it's not the way you talk to somebody in such pain.
So that's one thing.
Except that Yaakov is Amos. At the end of the day, that's what he represents. So he kind of, his courtesies are hindered by his requirement to say the truth always.
There's plenty of times that we know Yaakov lies for good reason.
It's a test. When he lies, he's being tested.
Interesting.
Right? He's actually being tested in the midah that is his strength, just as his father and grandfather had been tested.
So we would suggest that Yaakov is being very very stern here. Perhaps
he's actually being truthful. He's actually being truthful without being kind. Right. And he's saying, I'm not God that can do this.
There will be a stream of thought that can address that. But I think there's a lot more questions. How do you understand Rachel's actual request? Right. Presumably, they were doing everything they could on a hishtadlus level. So what exactly is Rachel saying? Give me children, as if it was in his power. Right? And that's actually Yaakov's response. So either the question makes no sense or the answer makes no sense in this back and forth. Either if Rachel's actually asking for Yaakov to give her children in some miraculous way, so then Yaakov Avinu's response makes sense. I'm not God, but I think we would expect more from Rachel. That how can she be asking something like
that? It was a good question. It was a good request.
So how do we make sense of that request? How can she say, "Give me children"? What ability does Yaakov have to do that?
Because you learned that in the previous parsha when Yitzchak was davening with Rivka.
Mm-hmm.
He asked for children on her behalf.
So you're making a leap here.
It was a good question. If your father could ask for children on her behalf, why can't you do the same?
So you're saying exactly what Rashi says. You're making a leap, though, right? When she says Hava Livanim, Rashi is going to say, we could just look inside right now, the next source. But Tikana Rachel Ba'achosas, so Rachel was feeling jealous concerning her sister. Kina b'maseh hatovim. So first of all, Rashi is addressing how do you understand jealousy among the imahos. We would think that that's a bad midah. He says no, this is a good kind of kina. She was having jealousy over the good deeds that Leah did. Amra ilule shetzadka mimeni lo zachsa levanim. She said, had Leah not been much more righteous than me, then she wouldn't have merited children. It must be that there's something wrong in the way I act, and that's where she was coming from. But then the next thing, havali, when she says, give me children, v'chikak asa avicha leimecha. Rachel is saying, this is what your father did for your mother. Didn't Yitzchak daven for Rivka? So right, that's the leap. Havalivanim, give me children. I wouldn't necessarily know that means daven for me, but this is what Rashi is saying here. So then the request makes sense, right? Do we have a problem? But if that is the request, now what do we say about the answer?
So the request was that since Yitzchak didn't have a child, his request was a good request.
Huh?
And Yaakov said, "But I have children. I can't apply that principle to me."
Being mechaven to Rashi again. So then he said. So first of all, the next entry in Rashi, Rachel says, "Mesa anochi, I'll be dead." Right? What does that mean? I should actually die. So Rashi says, not literally. Mikan lemisha ein lo banim shechashav kames. You see from here the Midrash that a person who doesn't have children feels like a dead person. Feels like there's perhaps no future for their I don't know, genetic material or legacy more accurately, and that could lead to a person to feel despair.
But can I just speak a little off topic? Mm-hmm. We were saying last week, I think it was, that they followed the Torah even before the Torah was given.
According to the RAMBAN's approach.
So how could it be then that two sisters were married by the same man when the Torah explicitly says that a man may not marry his wife's sister, even if he divorces the wife, he can't marry her sister. So here you've got.
Right. So we the Ramban in last week's parsha, so he does mention that as an issue, and so his approach to that is he mentioned that in Eretz Yisrael only. That was the only place where the Avos kept all the mitzvos. And if you look, Yaakov, he gets married to both sisters outside of Eretz Yisrael by Lavan, and before he gets into Eretz Yisrael on his way back in next week's parsha, Rachel passes away. So that's the Ramban's take, that the Avos only kept the mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael specifically.
See, that principle should have hold also for Rachel. Rachel should have disqualified herself from marrying Yaakov.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to marry two wives. I'm disqualified. I can't do it. It'll be like a challah.
There's another interesting approach of the Maharal. I don't know if we mentioned it last week at all, but he said the Avos kept the Torah with regards to the positive commandments. The negative commandments they kept to the extent that they could, but if they felt for whatever reason because of their destinies, they had to cross that line, so to speak, that they would do so. And this would be one of those situations, I guess, where the Maharal would come in and say Rachel knew that she was also supposed to be contributing to the future of the Jewish people, so she got married to Yaakov, and Yaakov agreed. So that's a possible answer. Anyways, Rashi continues mentioning what we said earlier. So Yaakov Avinu's response is Hatachas Elokim Anochi v'chi b'mkomo ani, is am I in God's place? Hashem anu mimecha. So he says God is withheld from you. Rashi picks up on that from you aspect of the pasuk, and he says that Atamar she'asa ka'aba. Right? You Rachel, you said that I should do like my father. Ani eni ka'aba. I'm not like my father. Abba lo hayu lovanim. My father, he didn't have any children, Yitzchak, and therefore he davened. Ani yesh li banim. I have children. Mimecha mana v'lo mimeni. God's withholding children from you, not from me. Now, this somewhat explains Yaakov's statement, but I'm not so sure it solves our problems. Does this sit well with us? This response? Still pretty difficult to hear. It's still pretty harsh, but moreover, I think there's a philosophical issue here that the Ramban's going to get to.
You have to start with whether we have midrashic belief that the Avot understood the future. That they understood that each of the marriages was for the purpose of procreation, that each of these Avot was to have contribution. If we believe that, if we understand that from Midrash, then his response is inappropriate. And he's to try harder. His response is that just like daven doesn't mean I'm going to get everything I daven for. I think that RAMBAN will talk about that.
I think we're overcomplicating something. I think there's a very simple question to ask here.
There's a simple answer to this. When it says when Yitzchak and Rivka were on the Hamariah, it says they were opposite each other, which means they were equal to each other. That's where Yaakov picked it up. They were equal. They were on different sides, but they were equal in their position. And Yaakov is saying it's not the same. It's in the same situation. We're not equal. I had children. You didn't. We're not equal. I don't know if he can. I don't know if you can really agree to that. But that's his reasoning. It's not. It's not personal. He's using like.
He's speaking from a mathematical perspective. You're saying something just a simple equation.
He's speaking from a halacha.
He's actually saying
that's the way
and that's who he is.
So we'll see. The Ramban, I think, asks a very straightforward question on this. Let's get to what the Ramban says.
Straightforward.
His grandfather is. He's not.
So Ramban on the next side of the page. So he says. He addresses Rashi's explanation, and he's not so sure he likes it. So Havali Vanim. Ramban says Avraham Mefarshim, Rashi and Ibn Ezra Tispal Alai, that request, and the Ramban agrees with this part, that Rachel is asking Yaakov to daven for her. If not, I'm going to die. So Ramban says Loshon Rashi, he's quoting Rashi, Shemi she'ein lo vanim chashav kames. Rashi says the person that doesn't have children, it's like they're dead. Vu Midrash Rabbeinu. That comes from the words of Chazal. It's from Bereshis Rabbi. Fani Tama. But I'm surprised by this. Imkein lama chara apo. Why did Rachel why did Yaakov get angry at Rachel? V'lama amar hatachas elokim anochi. Why did he say, am I in God's place? V'shomei el tzadikim Hashem. God listens to the tzadikim. So if Rachel's asking for Yaakov's tefillos, that's a legitimate request. Why is he responding so harshly? Umasha amar. And concerning what he says, that Rashi quotes from the Midrash, Avalohayu lovanim ani yesh li banim. Says, my father Yitzchak, he didn't have kids, so he can ask for these things, but I have kids, so why am I going to ask? That from you, Rachel, children are withheld, but not from me. So the Ramban asks on this, what? Tzadikim can't daven for others? Who cares that his problems are solved? If Rachel's got problems, you should daven for her too. So even if you want me to bring a source, and it's pretty obvious, but if you want to bring a source, so you have situations where Eliyahu, Navi, and Elisha, they daven for other people that have children, people that are not their own wives, right? So what's the deal here? It could be that this is in fact why Chazal actually comment on this. Amr Bereshis Rabbi, they say in the Midrash, Amr lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to Yaakov Avinu after this incident, Kach onen asana. This is how you answer the downtrodden. Chayecha, by your life, Shabanecha asidin la'amod l'fnei bana. Your children, the rest of the 11 Shvatim, are going to be bowing down to her son Yosef. That's somehow a punishment. That even though Yosef is also one of Yaakov's children, obviously, but it's certainly not a moment that a father is proud of when Yosef is in such a position that he's putting all the other kids into submission. That's not something that would be enjoyed by Yaakov. So that's a punishment. And Ramban says perhaps that's what's going on here.
But
quite simply,
the irony is that the last thing that Yaakov does.
That's sorry?
The last thing that Yaakov does is beg his son to bury him properly. Right? He's actually begging him. It's very unbecoming of a father. And it's as if this now has finally played out. These events have now played out.
Saying that too is a punishment for this incident, that he's in some ways subservient to his son from Rachel.
You pointed out that the children are all subservient to Rachel's son, right? As if it's a punishment in here. And I'm saying the irony is that it even happens to Yaakov.
Yaakov himself. Look at Yosef's dream. The sun and the moon are also bending down.
Why does the father say, "If I have found favor in your eyes"?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very unbecoming thing for a father to say.
It's true.
It's because he fears him. Yeah.
So that could be an extension of what this Midrash says is the punishment. But anyway, so the Ramban says that it could be we don't have to justify what Yaakov's response is, because the Midrash itself says he did something wrong. He snapped here for some reason. And God is not happy with him about this. The Ramban continues, a simple explanation of the pasuk is Rachel says, "Please give me children." And it's like what we've been saying until now, that she's asking for Yaakov to daven for her. That what was going on was that Rachel asked Yaakov to daven for her and to make sure she gets children at all costs. And if not so, if Rachel doesn't have children, she's going to die out of this pain of not having children. And when Rachel said that statement of if I don't have children, I'll be like as if I'm dead, she didn't speak properly, and that was coming from her own emotional sense of jealousy here. She thought that because of Yaakov's great love for her, Yaakov would fast over this. He would wear sackcloth and put dirt on his face, and he would have, from I guess more of a sense of desperation, davening for his wife so that she shouldn't die. Not only so that she should have children and make her happy, but because Rachel is basically saying, if you don't give me this, I'm literally going to die, and that's going to put the pressure on Yaakov a little bit.
The only other place I can recall where we talk about a person is when Moshe says, Moses responds, I haven't got a Chumash here I want to look up. Remember Moshe saying the same thing. You don't fix me up here with these Gizbei Israel. We have one understanding.
Setting a pretty serious ultimatum.
I'm ready to die now.
Yeah.
Which seems very comparable to what Rachel was saying.
Right. So he's saying in the plain meaning of the text that it's not that she's saying it's as if I'm dead. He's saying that she's really threatening, saying I'm going to die if you don't do this. But then look in the next pasuk. RAMBAN says, Yaakov got upset at this. The way the tefillas of tzaddikim work, it's not necessarily going to be the case that they get answered every single time. And because Rachel came and made this request from an overly emotional state that a loved wife might make, knowing that she's in this position of power perhaps, her intention was to scare Yaakov about the possibility of her dying. Concerning that, Yaakov felt she crossed the line. He knew that was not it's not something a person can actually make a claim of, and for that he was very upset. Yaakov's response is, I'm not God, that I can necessarily give everybody children at once. Yaakov himself didn't really pay so much attention to Rachel's complaint. Like we said, that Yaakov said, I have children and you don't. This wasn't an actual legitimate statement, coming from a sense of being rational. He was saying this specifically to admonish her and to embarrass her. He's saying, you crossed the line here. You took this discussion and you made it overly emotional. You threatened me with the idea that you're going to die. And Yaakov even says that's just not true. You're trying to blow things out of proportion. You're trying to make it put undue pressure on me to make this happen, when it's not necessarily a matter of my effort. It's a matter of what God wants. And for that, he gave her a tochacha. When Rachel then saw and she was no longer able to rely on Yaakov's tefillah, Yaakov said, nothing doing, I'm not giving an inch here. She then started davening for herself. Kill Moshe at Tza'aka. And then God listened to her voice. And that's possibly why in the psukim that continue where it talks about Yosef's birth, that's why it says God actually listened to her. Not listened to them, God listened to her. And specifically it was Rachel's tefillos that eventually had her merit getting children. It's a very interesting take on this whole thing. Basically the Ramban is saying that both people were wrong in this discussion. That Rachel perhaps was overly dramatic in this whole issue, and that Yaakov responded in kind, and he shouldn't have. It might be that in fact Rachel was wrong to say what she did, but Yaakov responding with a certain sense of harshness also was uncalled for. And that's what the Midrash says, that he did something wrong, and he's also fit for punishment for that. But something else that comes out very interestingly here, that Yaakov's admonishment actually seemed to work. Right? At this point the Ramban says, what does Rachel do? She realizes this is only dependent on me, and then she starts davening, and that's when things start really start rolling. Right? It's a very interesting concept. One of my Rabbi, Rav Newberger, so he explains that there's actually there's a foundational idea. You mentioned earlier, Zev, about Shmuel's birth with Chana and Elkanah. That this happens in a number of places where a person realizes that there's no one to depend on besides God, and it's up to them to entreat God, and they don't have any excuses, they don't have anyone else to rely on. That's when a person's tefillah comes out most powerfully. That's when they really feel that they're dependent on God and God alone. That's when they daven their hardest. So with regards to Chana also wanting children, her husband Elkanah, what's the breaking point for Chana? When Elkanah comes and says to her, "What? Why are you so upset? I'm like 10 kids to you, aren't I?" He's saying, like, I'm so great. What do you need kids for? At that point, Chana realized that Elkanah was not really doing much for her. At that point, he had given up hope on her having children. And that's the point when, if you look in the Navi, Chana then runs to the Beis HaMikdash. She starts praying, and then eventually she's blessed with a child with Shmuel. And there's another point where this comes out with regards to the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That if you look in the Pesukim, it seems that the cries that Klal Yisrael make, that God eventually hears and listens, and the Geula process starts rolling, that's specifically after the second king in Mitzrayim, the second Paro, comes to power. So people ask, what's the connection? It says that the first Paro died. No, not the Paro. There's the Paro in Bereshis that worked with Yosef. So assuming he's gone, there's the one that's at the beginning of Parsha Shemos that starts enslaving all the Jewish people, and then the Pesukim talk about him dying and a third Paro coming, right? And it says after that third Paro came, that's when everybody started crying out to God, and that's when God listened. So what's the connection? So many explain along the same lines that we're mentioning here. There was a hope when the Paro that's currently ruling over them is ruling over them with an iron fist, but you see he's getting kind of old. He's not going to live for that much longer. There's a hope of the Jewish people. Maybe the next Paro will be nicer. Maybe he's going to let us enjoy our lives a little bit more. And then when the new Paro came and they saw that was definitely not the case, that things only got worse and things didn't change at all, that's when they really screamed out. That's when they realized there's no one to place our hope on besides the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's when they cried. That's when the tefillos were their strongest. And that's when the Geula process started rolling. It's a very interesting idea, and so that's apparently what Yaakov Avinu was trying to accomplish here. When the Ramban says, "Yasser osa ula haklima," the Ramban says that Yaakov admonished her in a way to put her in a position where she should realize that she shouldn't rely on Yaakov's tefillos alone, but that she should daven on her own. That's something that really pushed her to the point where she started davening much harder, and that's when things got rolling.
Penina's given some credit.
Penina also motivated her a bit, right?
Her teasing her was not a cruelty. It's a Gemara that says that.
But I think they say that Penina did wrong nevertheless. I think similar to what we're saying here about Yaakov. Yaakov had a good intention apparently.
It says it's what
but again,
instigated her to.
How harsh can you say these things? You got to make sure that even when you have good intent, to say it in the right way. And for that reason, I think Penina is not viewed as so positively as with regards to what she did. We say that she had good kavanah, but she didn't do it right. In the same way here, the RAMBAN quotes that Midrash that seems to indicate that Yaakov also could have done things in a little bit of a different way. His intention was correct, and it worked, in fact, but he could have said it in a nicer way. It's also a nice relationships advice that the RAMBAN is giving us. You could be right, but you don't necessarily have to make it known so clearly. So with that, I think we'll end. Right? Sure.